Today we will be looking into the portion of scripture that we have just read under the title, Pressing On. Pressing On. Please help me to preach to your colleague. Tell them, pressing on. As we look into the subtitle, Pressing On, it will be important, as my brother Kieti did mention, is that on the 31st of December, we assembled here for a night vigil to usher in New Year, and among the things that we were able to discuss was under the topic, let my people go, so that they may be able to worship God. And God is calling us, as we were allowed to come into the year 2022, is so that we may be able to worship God. That should be our primary focus. And during that time we said there are some of the hindrances that cause many of us, even as we cross over to the new year, not to achieve that. And we realize, number one, is many people do not have a personal relationship with this God. And for that reason, it becomes hard for you to serve and worship whom you do not know. And number two, we realized that even as we crossed over to the new year, the devil wants us to be able to cross over, but stay very close to the border, so that anytime the devil wants to use us, he can be able to stretch his hand and get hold of every one of us. And you remember we said, it is the desire of every one of us to be totally sold out into serving God. Do not sit at the edge. Don't sit at the border, because it is a very tricky affair. And we realize that there is also the hindrance the devil desires is only a part of us should be able to go, either the men or the women or just the children. But we are saying in 2021 we want to worship God with all the family, with all our resources, so that when we come to serve God, we are here as a family. We are here in total unison of all the people whom we are called. The church at Philippi was a church that Paul had a very sentimental attachment to it. And the church at Philippi, when they heard that Paul had been imprisoned, they were concerned, and they sent a young man by the name Epaphras and told him, go and do two things. On our behalf, take a gift of love offering to Paul. But secondly, inquire about his health. And once you get the information, bring it back to us so that we know how to respond appropriately. So Epaphras goes to Philippi, delivers a goodwill letter to Paul, and Paul says, oh, you have remembered me again. I even did not expect a gift from you. And Epaphras is meant to take another journey from Rome all the way back to Philippi for the purposes of returning the information. And now Paul is able to address some of the things that the church had inquired, and that brings us to Philippians chapter 3. And in Philippians chapter 3, today we want to talk about pressing on. Context, prison. The four-dimensional areas I want us to look in terms of pressing on. Number one is find some dissatisfaction. Find some dissatisfaction. Paulo anaandika barua hii moyo ukiwa mzito, na kama unataka kusonga hatua ya mbele kutoka mahali ulipo, itakulazimu utambue kitu kimoja katika maisha yako ambacho hauridhiki nacho. If you have to move forward, if you have to press forward and achieve what you desire, you must be able to identify something in your life that you are dissatisfied about. Church, listen together with me. What Paul says in verses 13, he says the following words: brothers, I do not consider myself yet to have taken hold of it. He says that yes, I may, in the eyes of many people, I may be considered to have achieved a lot. But anakumbuka na kusema kwamba hata mnaponiona namna hii bado nimepungukiwa, bado kuna jambo ambalo sijaweza kulitimiza. I have not yet achieved. I have not yet arrived. I am still dissatisfied because I know I ought to have been further than where I am. I know I should have made a milestone from where I am. I don't consider myself against the measurement of humanity, because the standard of measurement is between me and my God. Church, if you want to go further in your Christian walk, you want to go further in your achievement of your goals and priorities, do not measure yourself against the baby steps of the people who surround you. Measure yourself against the standard that God has been able to set for you. Let's look a little bit for Paul, even when he says he has not achieved. Because had many of us been able to reach where Paul had reached, we would have been able to say we have reached the epitome. We have reached the climax. We have attained all what needs to be attained. Together with me, please look into verses 4, 5, and 6 of the same chapter 3. Listen to Paul's resume. Listen to his CV. He says this: if anyone thinks he has a reason to put confidence in the flesh, kama kuna mtu aliye na sababu ya kujipiga kifua na kujigamba, Paulo anasema mimi si mchache. I am not the least among them. Listen to this gentleman. He says the following: I have more. In terms of circumcision, circumcised on the 8th day. That was what God commanded for the children of Israel, that every male should be circumcised on the 8th day. And Paul is saying, to the 8th day of the letter, I observed the law. Talk to him on matters of the people of Israel. He says, of the people of Israel, I'm of the tribe of Benjamin. Who is Benjamin? Benjamin is the last born of Jacob with Rachel, the most beloved son after Joseph. Not just any other passerby. And Joseph and Jacob says, this is a son of my old age. And he loved him compassionately. Paul says, talk about my deep heritage. I'm a pedigree. Mimi sio chotara. Mimi ni mtu wa kuhesabika katika kabila na taifa la Israeli, kwa sababu mimi ni wa kabila la Benjamin. He says, on matters of being a Hebrew, kama ni kuwa Mwebrania, I am a Hebrew of the Hebrews. A Hebrew father, a Hebrew mother, pure blood. This is going to be contrary to young Timothy, who had a Gentile father and a Hebrew mother. Paul says, in regard to the law, kuhusu mambo ya sheria, I am a Pharisee. That I have been able to observe the Pentateuch. I have been able to observe the Torah. The first 5 books of the law. I have not only studied them, I have committed them to memory. He is a Pharisee. He is a religious person. He is not the scum of the air. And then he says, on matters of zeal, if you want to know what I'm passionate about, when you want to talk about what was able to drive you? Oh, he says, persecuting the church. As for legalistic righteousness, kama ni kutafutana makosa, anasema kwamba I was faultless. That is Paul, whom he is saying here as he presses on. Number one, he says, I am dissatisfied. I know I may have achieved a lot, but if I don't get dissatisfied na umbali nimetoka, siwezi songa zaidi. Church, we want to thank God for how far he has been able to bring us. But remember, it is also very possible the past successes can be able to be our future failure. I have a friend of mine whom we went to school with him in the primary years. And in those primary years, he was able to, at some point in history, he became number one. At some point in history, he became number one in Standard 3. But his academic grades, as he had reached number one, that was the epitome. He stopped working hard. Grades zikaanza kuteremuka. I know that can resonate with many of us, if not our parents. Na kila saa nakuuliza, ni nini inaendelea? That even sometimes parents think ulikopi. Kwa sababu, how can you just become number one once for life and never go back again? Kavi ikaanza kuteremuka. And every time you'd be able to ask my friend, ongeza bidii, unaona graph inateremuka. You'd always go back and akwambia, unajua wewe unijui vizuri. Wacha ni this, tunaona hapa nilikuwa number one in Standard 2. Anytime you want to ask him about his progress, even when he's now number 26, anakwambia, unajua wewe unaniona tu saa hii number 26. Lakini angalia kwa report form ya Standard 2. I was once number one. And he continued academic downfall just because in Standard 2 he was number one. And then your guess is going to be good as mine. When it came to class 7, he could not be able to make the threshold of a secondary school because in Standard 2 he was number one. We have achieved gradual developmental stages in this church. We want to appreciate how far the Lord has been able to bring us, but we must be able also to say that we have not yet achieved. There is still a lot that we can be able to achieve, both in terms of developmental structure and also in terms of missions and outreach, in terms of ministry, in terms of fellowship, in terms of worship experience. There is yet a lot to be achieved. Church, number one, I want to be able to suggest that we get dissatisfied with where we are currently, so that we can be able to move far. Number two, Paul says something very powerful. He says as he's getting dissatisfied, he finds a new devotion. Number one, we have said he is able to find some dissatisfaction that he has not yet achieved. But now he is able to say, I want to find a new devotion. Listen to verses 13, where we have just read. The Bible says, but one thing I do, is to forget what is behind and straining towards what is ahead. One thing I do. If we were to ask every one of us individually, what is that one thing that drives you? What is that one thing that causes your heart to beat and pound? What is that one thing that causes you to wake up from your bed that early and causes you to delay going back to bed? What is that one thing? When the psalmist was able to write in Psalms 27, he said, "This is one thing I desire, that I may be able just to behold the beauty of the Lord." He says that was that one thing that he desires. Jesus speaking to Mary and Martha, he says, Mary has chosen that thing, one thing that is desired. And that is why now Paul is challenging us and says, what is that one thing that you want to devote yourself to? This one thing is what we are challenging every one of us to be able to use it as your rallying call, even as you continue to serve God in AIC Milimani. What is it, that one thing? Those who study matters of climate change and natural phenomena, it is interesting that when we read, and especially in the Kenyan context, about the rivers of Kenya, when we hear the word Budalangi, what do we associate it with? Why floods? Hear this. Today, every scientist will agree that Tana River has got lesser water in terms of volume than all the water that flows through Budalangi. Tana River, volume-wise, it has lesser water than the water that flows through Budalangi. The only difference is one thing. In Budalangi, because it is a flat span of area, all the waters that come from the Charangani through Nzoia area, it all goes through a flat area and the water spreads wide. As a result of that, it floods every area. So far, not even a dike has been able to keep the water, because a dike is just an embankment of soil put in a flat area so that water does not cross over. Tana River, because of the gorge, because of the V-shaped valley, all the water goes through the valley, and as a result of that, it is easy to harness it. It is easy to develop that water. It is easy to manipulate that water. And that is why you will realize 70% of Kenya's electricity comes from Tana River, not Budalangi. Yet, Budalangi has more water than Tana River because of one thing, the gorge. All the Seven Forks Dam, we can be able now to talk about water transport and irrigation. We can be able to talk about water transport and water sport just because of one thing. And that is why I want to challenge as many of us in this congregation. What is that one thing that you want to be totally sold out as you serve God? One thing that you can be able to say to the next generation, this is what I want to be remembered of. Thank you for those who have been able to identify that one thing, that one goal, that one purpose, one reason as to why God has called them. But to the many of us, not only do we want us to be dissatisfied with our past, but we want also to commit ourselves to that one thing that God is calling us. When God calls you to raise up a godly generation, and I want to say this even with a little bit of a broken heart, because a while ago, the generation that is listening to me here and also online, we also watched about the moral decay of our society under our watch. When careless words were uttered, just in a generation that we are serving, when statements started floating and seeing them everywhere. For example, a statement, I feel nothing. I feel nothing. That person becomes consciously dead, that they do not respond to the needs and the challenges of the society. And as if that was not enough, still under our own watch and generation, we moved, not only do I feel nothing, we even incorporated, na ninajua wale walitumia hii statement hawakuja kanisa leo, kwa sababu hicho kizazi ambacho tumekuwa nacho tukaanza kutumia the word utadu. Najua hao nyinyi hamjatumia, wale walitumia hawakuja leo. Utadu, an attitude of don't care. So we raised up a generation with a devotion, utadu. If I do or I don't, utadu. If I step on your toe, utadu. And now, church, with a broken heart, we are just about to raise up another generation that has started coming up with a very interesting rallying call. Sipangwangwi. That is a generation that tells me, don't care about me. Mimi nitajisort. You have no control over me. I don't care about authority, both at home, at school, or elsewhere. Mimi sifanyi nini? Na ninajua hawa wakuja kwa kanisa leo. Hata hiyo sauti hii kutoka hapa, by the way, ni wengi wametaja nje. Kwa sababu if you are going to be a person of devotion, you must be able to also to align yourself and subject yourself to other people who can be able to help you navigate the turbulent waters. Interestingly, Charles Darwin took away the origin of man, origin of God. Karl Marx took away the essence of man, and Freud took away the spiritual nature of the physical relationship. And that is why we are raising up a generation that they do not care about their origin and relationship with God, neither do they care about humanity. And that is why they would be able to say, without blinking their eyes, Sipangwingwi. May that be a way from this generation that we are raising as a church and as a community. May we raise up a generation that honors God. May that be our devotion, among other things. When I was a child, I laughed and wept how time would be able to creep. When I became a youth, I started dreaming and talking how time just walked by. When I became a full-grown adult, time started running. It became a little bit faster than me. And now that I am becoming older and growing older every day, time is flying. And soon, before I arrive with doing what I wanted to do, that one thing, time is gone. Church, may I be able to suggest to every one of us, as we pursue particular devotion, wasting time is suicidal. The difference between an amateur and a professional, many would agree with me that an amateur does things from time to time in small bursts, small surges, with a lot of ups and downs, but professionals devote all their full time, all their life in pursuing one particular goal, and they pursue it gradually. The difference between a hare and a fox. A hare is not as fast as a fox. A rabbit or a hare is very fast. It can be able to sprout from one area to the other. How does a fox get a hare as part of their evening meal? Consistency. It is not because of speed, consistency. How, church, I want to challenge every one of us that may we be able to develop consistency even as we do our ministry. D.L. Moody, that great preacher, promoter, evangelist, when he was working with YMCA, he did so many things, but one of the things that he came to realize a little bit deep in his life, one Sunday after preaching, he said to the congregation that was listening to him in Chicago, "Go home and think about getting saved for a week. Then come back and I will lead you to Christ." Preached with an opportunity for people to become saved. He tells them, go home, think about it for 1 week, and when you come back, I will lead you to Christ. That week, the great Chicago fire took place, and many of his audience were burnt in that fire without having taken that opportunity. And since then, D.L. Moody changed his perspective of ministry, and he devoted himself to only one thing: evangelism, evangelism, and evangelism. And he impacted 2 continents just because he devoted himself to one thing. That is the one thing that causes a prism to convert the rays of sunlight into just one simple focus, and it becomes a fire. What is that one thing that you are pressing yourself and devoted to? Paul says, I'm not just dissatisfied, but now I am now devoted to one thing. But listen to number 3 lesson that Paul teaches us in verses 14. He finds some direction. He says this in verses 14. I press on towards the goal to win the prize. When he presses on, he decides that he's going to forget everything else. When he presses on, he decides that he's going to ignore side distractions. By the way, church, today is the 2nd day of the year, in a month that is named after a Roman god called Janus. Janus, from where we get the word January, is a Roman god who is double-faced, who has got 2 faces, facing both east and west at the same time, or facing north and south at the same time. As a church, as a member, a follower of God, you cannot be able to be a double-faced person. You cannot be able to be moving forward while facing backwards. You cannot be able to afford to be able to keep your eyes off the steering wheel, because you are going to lead both yourself and the next generation astray. Paul says, this is going to be my direction. Everything that is behind me, I am going to forget it. Have you ever wondered, church, when we as a church use "this is our mission"? What is almost the second thing? This is our vision. And the reason why we call it vision is because this is the direction we want to pursue. When you have got 2 visions, how do you, in English grammar, students of English, when you have got 2 visions, how do you write them? Students of grammar, 2 visions. Okay, 2 visions, an English prefix that indicates double is either by, B-I, or D-I. So which of the 2 do you use for vision? You use D-I. Put D-I in front of vision. What do you have? When we talk about basically there is division, we are literally saying every one of us has got their own. And that is why we are calling and making this clerical call for every one of us, that we rally ourselves on that one vision, so that we do not look back at the past sin. We are not going to look back on the past failures. Yes, it has happened, but we can be able to bounce back and continue with one direction. A little story about Abraham Lincoln. In 1831, he failed in his first business and he went bankrupt. In 1833, he came back to his feet and failed the second time. 1835, his fiancée died and that devastated him. In 1836, Abraham Lincoln suffered a nervous breakdown. In 1838, he ran for the office of the Speaker of the House and he was thoroughly defeated. This is something that he repeated in 1840, 1843, 1848 in Congress, in the Senate in 1855, all the way, even trying the office of the Vice President in 1856, Senate in 1858, until 1860, when he was elected the President, after many trials, but being focused on the same goal. Church, I want to challenge us that not only are we going to remain dissatisfied, not only are we seeking new devotion and new direction, may I be able to suggest the last and the fifth determination. Finding determination. Finding some determination. And he says, I press on towards the goal to win. Not just pressing for the purposes of participation. I have been able to observe a lot of world marathons. London Marathon, Chicago Marathon, Amsterdam, name it. And the runners are categorized into two. The first category are for the competitive runners, those who are running with the desire to win, those who are there for a reason. And others in category 2 are just participants, are just enjoying themselves, are just part of the team that is going to escort others. I pray that in AIC Milimani, we are all going to be in the first pack of the people who are going to be determined to win. We are not just going to be able to be part of the people who are mentioned to be members of Milimani without active participation. Paul says, I press on to win. And therefore, this is my prayer for all of us this year, that as we serve in AIC Milimani, not only not only are we going to be dissatisfied with the past, not only are we going to have a new sense of devotion, not only are we going to have some new direction, but we are going to be determined that when we put our hands on the plow, we shall be able to win. We have a mark, we have a finishing line, and that is why Paul says, before I finish my work, then I am giving it all and in all. And when he comes now to write to Timothy, he says, I have finished the race, because he's persuaded that when he started, the mark by which was set before him, he has been able to achieve that one thing, yet is now accomplished. This is my prayer. And this is my prayer that one day, as a congregation of AIC Milimani, when it will come to matters of the Holy Communion, we are all going to be determined to participate in it, so that it is not going to be a question of partiality. Some are partaking and others are seated, wondering what to do. And sometimes even I've been asked by our own children, Mommy, Daddy, can I go and take? And say, wait, watch your mchezo. We can be able to explain matters of the Holy Communion. And in a short while, because we are going to celebrate our first Holy Communion today, my prayer is that in this Holy Communion, we are going to be able to tell both ourselves and even the people who knew us, yes, I am not coming to this Holy Communion because I am the best, I'm the cream of the society. We are saying to the devil, yes, it is true that we have failed in the past. It is true we have not been able to hit the mark in the past. It is true we have let Christ down in the past. But we are telling the devil, we are now dissatisfied in wobbling in the mud. And that is why we have said, Christ cleanse us once more, so that we can be able to participate together with other believers. Because while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It is not under any reforms. It is not under any time that we were any better. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. This is going to be our devotion, that every time when we come for the Holy Communion, we are devoted to celebrate this communion as an opportunity to broadcast what Christ has been able to do to us. The devotion that we are going to give to this communion, it is acknowledgement that indeed Christ died for us. When we come for this great communion, we are saying that we have been able to identify a new direction in Christ. Zamani tulikuwa sisi watu wa kupotea na watu wa kuhurumiwa, watu wasiokuwa na matumaini, wasiokuwa na Mungu. Lakini tulipompata Mungu huyu, tulipompokea Kristo kama Bwana na Mwokozi wa maisha yetu, basi ya kale yamepita, tazama yamekuwa mapya. This is going to be our new direction as we celebrate this great communion. As we celebrate this great communion, we are determined to say that this communion, it is of the great work that Christ did for us on the cross. And for that reason, he has deposited a seal of guarantee in my heart so that I can be able to share this with the generations to come. And in a short while, we will be able to invite all of us to come to this great table, the table of the Lord, so that we may be able to worship together.